Good evening. This is Peter Helling with Dr. E. Michael Jones on the show that we call Israel. And I almost say it every show that we use the title Israel because people think of the nation in the Middle East, and I want people to think that Israel is Jesus and that the church is referred to as the Israel of God. If you're in Christ, you're in the true Israel. And sometimes you need to always question, when people use the word Israel, which one are they referring to? The true Israel or the carnal or earthly Israel? Mike just came back from the Middle East, and he's dealing with the nation of Israel over there. And he was in Iran, and he wrote an article, which I read the article, but my printer didn't the whole article. But just the first paragraph of this article, which will appear in Culture Wars,
in the July-August issue of Culture Wars magazine.
Okay, so just to give you a flavor of the article that he wrote there, and that hopefully with us tonight, I think it was a week, you were there, a week?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. A week there. Shiraz is roughly 200 miles, how do you say it? Sir, how do they say it?
Shiraz.
Shiraz is roughly 200 miles west of the hottest place on Earth, the Lut Desert, where the temperatures have been measured at 159 degrees Fahrenheit. Having me speak in Shiraz was Hamed's idea. Josh Gabi is the flamboyant 25-year-old son of an Iranian diplomat who grew up in Tunisia and was, as a result, fluent in French and Arabic. His language ability allows him to network, and his network now throughout Iran and large parts of the West. So this is the beginning of the article that Mike wrote, and he mentioned that we ought to preface this article with what's actually happening in the Middle East. And following the news, we have trouble in Iraq. The ISIS. Is trying to take over Baghdad, and these are the people that we train, and these are the people that were fighting what we call the dictator of Syria. So the people we train now looks like they're going against our interest in Iraq. So this happens all the time.
Yeah, they even have a name for it. It's called blowback. So when the first thing that John Kerry did when he came into office as Secretary of State was say he was not going to give sophisticated weapons to these people, whatever you want to call them. The Iranians call them the takfiri, or the excommunicators, or the rejectors, or maybe they're Al-Qaeda, or maybe they're ISIS or ISIL, the Islamic of Iraq and the Levant, or Iraq and Syria. Who knows who they are? They're just a group of people that got cobbled together to topple Hafez Assad in Syria, and now they're taking the weapons the United States and the Saudis have given them, and now they're marching in the opposite direction. And everybody's shocked at how quickly they are advancing. So part of the irony of history is they're marching on Baghdad. And the United States has its biggest embassy in the world in Baghdad, and it's in a place called the Green Zone. And now there are, 200 guards or security guards or whatever standing between the Takfiri and the Americans. It's not enough. So the real story is, the only hope that the Americans have now is the Iranian army, which will now come in from the east and basically save the government and save the Americans from the fate that these crazy liver-eating Takfiri Salaf have been inflicting on the rest of Iraq.
Can I just backtrack a bit and just kind of give a context here? I mean, how is this relevant to this community? Because if we were talking about how good Notre Dame's football to be this coming fall, we would know that that's relevant. It's going to affect us economically. It's going to affect Notre Dame. It's going to affect where we live. How is this? Is this just an intellectual concern?
There are a number of highly ranked football players in Iraq, and they were thinking of coming to Notre Dame, and now they're not coming. Is that relevant? Do we have relevance? Have we achieved relevance?
Sure, you would have relevance. First, we have Grace.
Let me try and be a little serious here.
Yeah.
The immediate result is that the Takfiri, the radicals, the Al-Qaeda group from Syria, is now attacking oil refineries. This means that ExxonMobil has pulled out of Iraq. It's too dangerous to pump oil. That means a significant amount of supply will stop, and we know when supply goes down, the price goes up. So the price of oil is going to go up. Depending on how serious it becomes, there are all sorts of derivatives that are keyed into future events on oil. We don't know how many. Nobody knows how many. But there are trillions of dollars of derivatives out there, which are basically insurance. If it really goes bad, if there's a significant drop, then people will want to cash in on those derivatives. There's no way that Wall Street can pay them off. It's got too many. It's like a bank that is way overextended in terms of amount of money in circulation, loans out as opposed to the money they can have to cover it. So it could cause a significant economic crisis. But what we're seeing more than that is the unraveling of the American empire. I think we've had nothing but bad news. Nothing but bad news. This whole misguided neoconservative, Israeli-inspired crusade in the Middle East under George Bush has backfired. It's blowback. The very people we were supporting are now turning against us and using our weapons to ready to kill Americans.
Okay, but most people do not accept the term that we are an American empire. Can you break down the word American empire to break it down to where somebody?
If we were a republic, we would have soldiers in New Jersey defending the Atlantic coast and soldiers in California defending the Pacific coast. An empire means that you've got places all over the world that you are controlling from one central country. That's what an empire is. It's always destructive. It destroys everything about civil life. The Roman Empire was an example of a place where it was involved in constant warfare, actually in many of the same places that the United States is involved in right now. Constant warfare leads to constant depletion of the treasury, which leads to a debasement of the currency, which leads to onerous taxes, which leads to the concentration of wealth into fewer and fewer hands through usury, and you end up with a totally dysfunctional country, empire, whatever you want to call it. Same thing has happened here.
Now, the 4th of July is coming up, and we're gonna get all excited about how we came into being as a country. Patrick Henry did not go to the Constitutional Convention, and he said, "I smell a rat," and he said it was for my understanding, it was for the building of an empire, and he didn't want to be part of that.
So, well, Benjamin Franklin, when he walked out of the Constitutional Convention, he was asked on the street, "What kind of government do we have?" And he said, "A republic if you can keep it."
But the John Wesleys of the day thought a republic was dangerous. What are the of our type of republic that's now, those principles have led us to where we're at now?
A republic is, let's say, the nation governed in the interest of the nation.
Yeah, but what happened? I mean,
what happened?
Either we had good principles in the beginning, we were hijacked, or what? How come we're imploding? Is it just accidental? We had good foundation, the principle?
No, it was rotten at the beginning, but it wasn't as rotten as it is now. The main problem at the beginning was that the United States was created by creditors. It's government of the creditors, by the creditors, and for the creditors. Creditors are the people who can lend money. The overwhelming majority of the people are debtors, not creditors.
But in your article that I read, and when you were there giving talks in Iran just a week ago or so, the issues that seemed to come up were the women in the home. You're talking basics. And
birth control is the biggest issue facing Iran right now.
But the birth control was causing the women to basically get rebellious. I mean, In other words, it was upsetting their culture. It was the role.
Right.
They call it role, gender ideology, or
Yeah, well, that's what the Polish bishop. They issued a pastoral letter in January, largely based on my book Libido Dominandi, in which they lump everything: gay marriage, sex education, pornography, all of this stuff is lumped together in their term called gender ideology. And basically, what I explained is that it's all of the sexual liberation is a form of political control. That was the speech I gave in Tehran almost 2 years ago.
Connection between sexual immorality, the people losing control sexually, and then the roles changing from the traditional Christian roles, even Muslim Christian role, where the woman has a role like Sarah and Abraham. They were kind of fixed roles. The man was the head of the home, and the woman, and now it's changed. And that's what they're seeing.
Well, you're saying sexual liberation is
What's the
essential.
connection between the two? The change roles and then the sexual liberation.
The sexual liberation is the engine that drags all this other stuff behind it. So basically, you are given the illusion that you can find sexual fulfillment outside of the channels established by God, namely in the family, where sexuality is ordained for the procreation of children. And you think you have these desires, you want to act on these desires, and suddenly there are people who appear who will facilitate this type of thing and give you the that you're free because you're acting on your illicit desires, but really are using this to control you. Because once you go against reason, you lose control of your own life, and people can manipulate your passions and control you from the outside. That's the basic premise of Libido Dominandi, the book I wrote about sexual liberation and political control.
So there is a connection between the sin of Adam and Eve. It was the forbidden fruit, and they were thinking they were going to get freedom. You'd be as gods.
Right.
And they were a type of sense. They were created by God. They were to till. Adam was to till the garden. The word till is where the Hebrew word for ibar, for slave. So there was a sense that he was God's servant.
Right.
And here's the temptation.
To be like God.
You can become I think there's a parallel. We were subjects to the king. Oh no, there's going to be no more such a thing. So America represented.
Well, there's no question that Satan was a prominent symbol of revolutionary activity. I mean, when Shelley wrote his manifesto for the Irish to have them rise up in rebellion, he quoted Milton. And basically, this is Milton putting words in Satan's mouth, saying, "Arise, awake, or be fallen." This is after the angels have fallen; they've been condemned to hell. Where he says, "Better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven." That's satanic, and the satanic appeal to revolution is obvious.
Well, look at
Satan was the first revolutionary.
What are the mottos of the states, like New Hampshire? Live free or die. I mean, there's a.
So, are you saying that America is satanic? Is that what you're saying?
Well, hold it here.
I want to get this down so that
let me.
The public and the South Bend public know exactly where you stand.
Well, I respect my elders, and I respect people that go. John Wesley founded the Methodist Church here. There's 48 Methodist churches.
I think you're evading the question.
No, I'm answering it. But just give me. John Wesley founded the Methodist Church, which became I don't know what it is now, but for a long period of time, the largest church in America. There's 48 Methodist churches in South Bend, the largest. His successor was John Fletcher. And he wrote this book in 1777. It's called American Patriotism, Farther Confronted with Reason, Scripture, and the Constitution. Observations on the dangerous politics taught by Mr. Evans and Dr. Price with a scriptural plea for the revolted colonies. And he goes through and he quotes out of Milton, and he says basically the principles that the Americans are founding their republic on are the same principles that Lucifer argued for to get 1/3 of the angels.
Rise, awake, or be forever fallen. That's what Satan said.
Yeah, he was
Rise
saying,
up.
and these were Masons.
So let me get this straight now. When the Ayatollah Khomeini refers to America as the great Satan, do you agree with him?
Well,
come on, Peter.
That's putting an issue at the table, which we can break down and see which parts we would agree with. But there's something there. I mean, if the founder of the largest church, his successor, writes a 150th book in 1776, arguing exactly that those principles were satanic, and the Masons George Washington, those guys, a large part of them were Masons. And the Catholic Church has consistently taught that Masons worship Satan. So you put this together, you go, wow, is it a wonder that this country has the problems it has?
It's like analogous to nuclear energy. You've got basically an explosion that's going on there. And if the rods overheat or if the water goes too low, you have an actual explosion. So the question is, can you take this revolutionary idea and tame it? That's part of what the American experiment was, I think, because it would be ordered liberty is the term they like to throw around. But after 200 years or more of experience, what's the verdict? Was Benjamin Franklin right? A republic if you can keep it. Well, it looks as if we haven't been able to keep it.
Well, what's the test? I mean, what's the test to prove whether or not? Well, I mean, what do you do? Point to statistics? Point to how kids are doing in school, or you point to divorce rates? What's the indicator?
No, I mean, John Adams said we have no nation that functions in the absence of a moral people. And he said that morality was going to be the criterion whereby we were to judge the.
Public schools were created. Indiana Constitution says the purpose of in Indiana is to encourage by all suitable means moral improvement.
And now they promote sodomy.
Well, I got fired for having a Bible.
Yeah, I understand.
Right.
But now they're promoting sodomy. So so you've got to, let's go back to the Ukraine here for a minute. First thing, this is a coup d'etat orchestrated by Victoria Nuland, one of the Jewish holdovers, neoconservative holdovers from the Bush administration. Spends $5 billion to overthrow democratically elected government, which we certified as legitimate, okay? Because they wouldn't go with the EU, they were going to go with Russia. Okay? What's the first thing they have to do? What is the first thing the thugs who take over? They pass sexual.
I read that, yeah.
They pass sexual non-discrimination laws. So
what's that mean?
Sodomy. That's what it means.
In other words,
you're the same thing here. You can't discriminate against sodomy. That's the beginning of it. Then, after they do that, do you know what happens? You qualify for an IMF loan, which means usury, which means you're totally enslaved by the time the great Satan gets done with you here. You know? Well, this is not what Benjamin Franklin had in mind, although you may make the case, I suppose, that it's implicit in any government which is basically created in the creditor class, because creditors are usurers.
Now, the relevance of what we're talking about is relevant to your trip to Iran, because basically these are the ideas that we're talking right here is what you were talking about.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was scheduled to talk about riba, and which is their word for usury, and mercy, and the Merchant of Venice. But it turns out that the conference, it wouldn't have worked. So I had extemporaneous speeches, and then I got to talk to a group called the Basiji, who were created as a sort of auxiliary of the Republican Guard to support them at their headquarters in Tehran. And they just, they asked me, what do you think? What's the big issue? I said, it's birth control. The big issue right now is birth control in Iran. When the birth control has dimensions to it. When people hear birth control, break it down. The difference between us, this is a battle that was lost in America. The Catholics fought that battle and they lost. We're talking, the Catholics, in the 1930s, won the birth control battle. When Monsignor Ryan went toe with Margaret Sanger before the American Congress, and the American Congress voted not to get involved in birth control. They're not going to subsidize birth control. Now it's basically a civil religion, You got groups that promote it as part of their religious observance. But over there, it's still a contest. Because in 1979, when the Iranians had their revolution against the Shah, and overthrew the Shah and overthrew the American influence there, they destroyed their movie theaters and they burned down their birth control clinics. And for 10 years, after 10 years, they had a birth rate of 3.5, which is big, which is huge. And then, for some strange reason, after the Ayatollah Khomeini, the new Ayatollah comes in and he allows birth control in. and what you had was a precipitous drop in fertility to half of what it was, 1.7, and that's below replacement rate.
But it wasn't just that, because your articles indicate that this so emboldened the women.
Well, let's not put the cart before the horse here. Once you allow birth control, once you allow these devices, you're going to create a feminist fifth column. And that's what happened over this period of time. So from 89, let's say to 2009, this feminist column grew and grew, and they're subversives, and they were being deliberately promoted by NGOs funded by the CIA.
But I think what's interesting, at least for me, is why is that? Why that happened? When you
Because you're in revolt against the logos of sex. So you're naturally going to be a revolutionary. You are revolting against the logos of sex because sex was intended by God for procreation. You're rebelling against God's order by taking birth control pills. You're a revolutionary.
So you're saying that once you start sinning, I mean, we used to teach this in the Baltimore Catechism, that once you sin, and if you don't stop it, then that usually goes on to more sin. So once there's any type of rebellion in your life, you're suggesting...
Once this happens, there are plenty of people out there, the CIA is masterful at this kind of thing, of funding fifth column and as NGOs, and that's what they did, and the revolution came out in 2009 where they almost overthrew the government. The feminists with their birth control pills almost overthrew the government. But the revolution prevailed. But now they're crisis point because they don't really understand how to deal with birth control. They don't understand it.
Do you think that they've been westernized, like movies? And
I'm telling you,
westernized?
Yeah, you can tell. You can look. You can see it on the street. The preferred mode of dress is the chador, which is basically this black robe that you wear, and this is about all that's exposed, you know. And there are people who are kind of moderately against the chador, and they wear the hijab, which is basically the head covering, and they wear something that looks like an airline stewardess's uniform. And then there are the westernizers. At the airport, these are the Iranian women who bleach blonde, okay, and the hijab is about as far back on your head as you dare, you know. And now there are all these websites where there are Iranian women taking off the hijab on camera. Deliberate provocation. And right now, after the Ahmadinejad government was replaced by the Rouhani government, Rouhani is determined to reach an agreement with the West because he wants to end the sanctions. So the question is, what are you willing to guys? I mean, obviously, there's no moral principle involved in whether the hijab sits here or here or here.
Well, let's take that. And you talked about 1965 in your article a lot, and that's when the League of Decency,
Legion of Decency.
Legion of Decency. But it's also in '65 was the end of Vatican II. And when I went to church, my sisters, if they forgot their head covering, they had some at the church. But you were not allowed to worship in the church.
And Peter, historically, women have always covered their heads.
Right, but in '65,
historically, men have always worn hats. This didn't change until John Kennedy became president. If you look at pictures, fashion models, male fashion models in the New York Times in 1963, everybody's wearing a hat. This is normal to cover your head, both for women and men, and women certainly.
But in the Catholic Church, for 1965 years, in the Catholic Church of the world, all women at all times had a covering on their head.
Yeah.
And in about 1965, almost in a blink of an eye.
Okay, so let's take this a step further. There's no moral law that says you have to cover your head. It's a custom. It's mores, not morals, okay? It's a custom. So you can say, do you just dismiss it because it's a custom? If so, how do you, and what happened to American morals? Because you take off the head covering and the next thing you know, it's sodomy in the bushes in Buena Vista Park. So how do you prevent this? How do you prevent this slide? This is precisely the situation that they're in right now. How do you prevent the slide from something that is really, it's cultural, it's relative. How do you prevent that from going to complete moral depravity, which is where it ended up in the United States?
Well, it's not, I disagree with cultural, because the Catholic Church and all churches based their requirement that men could not worship with a hat on and women must worship with a covering of some sort on. And they base that on 1 Corinthians chapter 11. And some people say, well, the covering could be their hair. That's brand new. No exegete ever.
It's not a moral principle. There's a moral principle that you could possibly talk about in terms of modesty. Okay, a modesty, there might be moral culpability with lack of modesty.
No,
but this is a means toward an end.
But if it's a commandment in Scripture, that's not a custom, is it? If it's a commandment, a divine
no, it's a custom.
You don't think it's a commandment?
No. Did Moses say anything about what to wear on your head?
Well, let me just read it. I'm going to read it because I think it's relevant. Okay, this is what Paul said. Now I want you to realize that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman and the head of Christ is God. Every man that prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head, and every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It is just as though her head were shaved. If a woman does not have her head, she should have her hair cut off, and it is a disgrace for a woman to have her hair cut or shaved off. She should cover her head. A man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God. Now, this is Paul speaking to the church.
Yes, you would do very well in Iran. This is precisely the crisis that's going on there right now. Because there's a question of clothing. The revolutionaries, the Safavid revolutionaries who were funded by the CIA and American intelligence, know the weak link in this chain. And they know that there's not something morally absolute about whether you wear or how you wear it. They know that. And they're using this as the thin end in the wedge. This is the crack that they're trying to make bigger.
Does the Quran require it? Is there a very clear statement in the Quran?
Well, there probably is, because everybody, Peter, it was the rule. You covered your head. Women covered their head whenever they went outside.
But if the Quran is very, very precise, like a Ten Commandment, the Ten Commandments says.
The answer is I don't know. I don't know whether it's in the Quran. I don't know.
Well, I think that would be a big thing in their minds, because they have to do it out of a command in their holy book. Then that's a whole different.
It doesn't matter though, because it's not morally significant. It's culturally significant, but it's not morally significant. Precisely the distinction that has to be made over there if they want to preserve the gains of the revolution. Because this is precisely the cultural battle is being waged against them. You know, is it a sin? Is it a sin to take off your hijab? I don't think so. Is it a sin to take it off in public? Well, you're using it as an act of rebellion against the social order. So in that sense, maybe there's culpability involved because of the intention, but the act is morally insignificant, whereas the act of birth control is not. That is morally significant, and the problem that you have in Iran right now is you got women wearing the chador taking birth control pills, and that's a contradiction.
But I think confusion there, because they would argue that there's no direct command that says you can't use birth control. Yet I see a direct command.
That's right.
I see a direct command that you must.
That's why
women must have a covering on the head.
That's right. That's why you're a fundamentalist, and you're not a Catholic. You used to be, but now this is fundamentalism. You're taking a sola scriptura approach that is distorting the reality of the situation.
Well, it'd be like my cousin, who's a lawyer in Portland, and his sister, my cousin, I hadn't seen her for 30 years, and I got to see her, and he doesn't want to talk to her much, and she homeschools, and she's a Presbyterian. He believes in stuff like six-day creation. You know, she's just a lunatic. And I go to him and I say, well, it's in the Ten Commandments. God created the world in 6 days. And he looks at me like, what are you talking about? That's not in the Ten Commandments. And I pull it out, and his eyes drop, and he goes, oh. And he's a lawyer, okay? Do you think lawyers should know the Ten Commandments? I mean, is it being a fundamentalist to say Ten Commandments
No, I'm saying a fundamentalist is basically, you've got this sola scriptura approach to reality. And it can be, it's distorting, first of all, when you deal with Scripture, the Catholic, the Christian Scriptures. It's really bad in Islamic, when you're dealing with Islamic Scriptures.
Well,
because you got some sense of, you got weak with the Christian Scriptures, whereas you don't have it with Islamic. with the Quran. The Quran was basically dictated by Allah to the angel Gabriel, who then dictated it to Muhammad, the prophet.
Well, but let's take the issue like Adam. Some people are arguing that is the biggest issue facing Christianity today, that whether Adam and Eve are historical.
You're right. It's
not.
A big issue. Do you know what the institution that God created to adjudicate these issues?
Darian, in the Catholic Church.
The Catholic Church. You can't do it on your own. This is the problem. The whole problem stems from the Protestant Reformation, where every Englishman who can read is now a scripture scholar and when it comes to reading the Bible.
But here's the problem. My nephew's in Rome. I guess they're going to let him come back for the summer, to be a priest. And so he thinks, he's Opus Dei, and he thinks he's going to be, totally loyal to all the. Well, I knew the question to ask him after he got out of his 4 years of pre-seminary. I said, "Well, do you believe Adam and Eve are historical?" Absolutely. His response: absolutely not. Science has proven that they're not at all.
Church states.
Okay, right.
He's not representing the magisterium.
But he believes he was taught purely by.
Well, what were you taught? Tell me what you were taught at Notre Dame.
I'm just saying.
So what?
What?
You got all these. You got this constant struggle. Wicked men who teach erroneous things for filthy lucre's sake, and the deposit of faith that needs to be preserved, and it is often preserved by saintly men, but will be preserved by the magisterium of the Catholic.
Why are most all Catholic institutions, people that go through them, do not take Adam and Eve, for example, as historical and literal, and yet the magisterium teaches they are. But yet when they grab those institutions, they believe in theistic evolution, and they don't have an Adam and Eve that they believe is what the early church fathers believed in. They believe science has changed that.
Why is there evil in the world, Peter? Why was known by wicked men who were interested more in money than they were in the truth? Explain that to me. Well, because the will is free. I mean, Father Hesburgh was more interested in money than he was in the truth or the Catholic faith. And Notre Dame is a limit to people who think that money is the most important thing in the world.
Well, I know that.
And the Bible has very specific things to say about people who choose mammon over God.
Well, I know that one of your.
Why are we getting off on this?
I'm getting off on that because the book you're writing, you said the most important chapter is the one on John Newton, where science took on this alchemy.
Isaac Newton,
sorry. Took on this dimension that I think now dominates. I think this science dominates and preempts theology.
Yes, it does.
Right, and I think you flushed that out.
Right,
and
I did.
It's
a chapter in my book on capitalism. Will be out. The book will be out in September.
And in my mind, the American Revolution was founded a lot with Locke debating Filmer, and the debate was over Adam and Eve. Filmer took Adam and Eve as literal, and that all authority comes from God through Adam, so that the king had authority. A divine right of the king came through Adam. Well, Adam doesn't exist for most academics and most theologians. So that's science preempting. That's Locke and Newton.
All you're talking about is the corrupt state of academe in the United States at this decadent moment in history. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right. It's totally decadent, totally interested in money at the expense of truth. The fact that that universities now impose these ridiculous sums for tuition that causes go into unrepayable debt, crushing debt, is just a sign of their wickedness. Yes, they're all wicked institutions. They're all involved in usury. They're all involved in the corruption of the truth. Okay. What do you want me to say? I wrote a book on Notre Dame, too. Okay, is Notre Dame still Catholic? The answer is no. It's capitalist. It's a capitalist university that masquerades as being Catholic. But this is the crisis now that we have in our country and in the church, because the church took its model of how it should govern from America. It's always the Achilles heel of the church that is going to look to some secular power to save it. Whether it's France, or at the time of France, the French king is going to save them. At the time in America, America was going to save the Catholics from the communists, so they all joined the anti-communist crusade. It's disastrous. It's whenever it happens. But now we're reaching one of those turning points in history where the empire is collapsing. At the very least, it's not growing. And the turning point came in the Ukraine when suddenly the coup brought about the return of Crimea to Russia. So suddenly the tide's going in the other direction. And now the same thing is happening in Iraq. That whole mad scheme that was created by our Jewish neocon friends to support invading Iraq and Afghanistan, it's all collapsing before our eyes. And their only hope to save the Americans is coming from the Iranians now. And they are the very people that Israel wanted to bomb. So this is what people would call the cunning of reason. You're seeing the working out of God's plan triumphing over the intentions of wicked men like George Bush and Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld and Victoria Nuland. I could go a whole list of people whose schemes are being reversed by God's power right now.
Where do you think the good people are in this country? Where's the good?
There's good every place.
Right, but where is there an institution?
The institutions are all, but the people are all good. Not all good. I mean, the people, the only battle worth fighting at this point is the battle for the Catholic Church. Because there's a guarantee that this institution will not be guaranteed from Jesus Christ himself.
Where is the strength of the Catholic Church in this country, you think, right now?
It's not strong in this country.
But where is it? Where could it be strong? Or where
in Poland.
Is it?
Poland's a good example because they just did that. They finally woke up to how gender ideology works to corrupt the nation. Poland is a group of people who have ethnic solidarity. They have a strong Catholic faith. They've suffered persecution and they're strong. They were part of the revolution in 1979, the twin revolutions against materialism. The Ayatollah in Iran in February, and then John Paul II shows up in Warsaw in June and says Mass public square in an officially atheistic communistic country. And that was the beginning of this motion of history of liberation from the twin evil materialist hegemons at that point, the United States and the Soviet Union. Soviet Union collapsed, and now we're seeing demise of the American empire.
But if the leadership, let's say ideally, let's say they started listening to what you were saying, the leadership, and started saying, Mike, you're right, I think I need to make some changes. Is that possible? I mean, could the leadership...
It happened in Poland. It did happen in Poland.
What are some things...
It was my book that caused that was instrumental in having the light bulb go on and understand how this whole project of sexual liberation is not political control. This whole business, all this stuff, gay marriage, you name it, it's all a way of controlling people, distracting people, redefining freedom. Freedom is now defined as your ability to engage in deviant sexual behavior. That's what freedom is in this country. There's no question. And that's a formula for total control.
Well, that was a definition of freedom that Wesley pointed out when he was writing pamphlets trying to persuade Americans not to be deceived back in 1776. He says the freedom they're arguing for is a freedom from God's law.
Right, which is slavery,
then.
Which is the same thing as slavery.
Right, and then Wesley was pleading...
There is no freedom from God's law because we are creatures of God according to his logos, and we're only free when we operate according to his logos. Any other time, whenever we're in rebellion against his logos, his order, his reason, we're enslaved. St. Augustine knew this at the fall of the Roman Empire. A man has as many masters as he has vices.
Right, and so Americans, we have this, the pursuit of happiness. I mean, we got the...
So why does the government promote all this stuff? Because they're not working in the interest of the American people. Their job is to enslave the American people in the interest of the people who pay their political contributions. Congress is totally in the hands of the Israel lobby.
But
totally.
Money interests were already operating strongly back in 17...
Absolutely, and it's always been a struggle. It's been a struggle. I go into this in the book on capitalism. A struggle from beginning to end. It has never stopped. And it's not going to stop because this is a capture, which means that it's basically of the creditors, for the creditors, and by the creditors, to the detriment of the debtors, the overwhelming majority. So it's intrinsically anti-democratic.
Well, let's say the vows of the monasteries, if you make a chastity, if you live chaste, they can't They can't control you
Can't
sexually.
manipulate you that way.
And if you make a vow of poverty of some sort, that means you're not going to be covetous. You're not going to borrow money to buy.
You're not going to borrow money, so you're not going to go into.
Right. So the reason they can do this is people want to be wickedly covetous, and they want to be wickedly sexually.
Right. It's fallen nature, human nature. This is what the Reformation was in a nutshell. The clergy wanted to have sex, and the princes wanted to steal the church property. That's the Reformation in a nutshell. And so Luther made a deal with the princes. I'll give you the church property, you make me the head of the state church. Every Protestant country made the same deal. England, Scandinavia, Scotland, it's all the same deal.
Well, the American Revolution, in my mind, kings over there, we can just steal the colonies from them, and we'll come up with some kind of Christian appearance.
Yeah, the moral is if you're going to steal something big. Don't rob a gas station. Steal Notre Dame University, which is what Father Hesburgh did in 1967, or steal, which is what Henry VIII did when he plundered the monasteries.
But we stole the 13 colonies from the king. Now, however we could justify it, that's exactly what we did. I mean, what do you think we did? We stole it.
I wrote a song about this, Peter. If you rob a convenience store, you will go to jail. But if you steal 50 billion or more, you'll be too big to jail. Right. There. So steal something big.
But part of your book, dealing with the sermons of Savonarola, you were getting into what they were preaching on covetousness. I mean, the solution.
So Savonarola was a moment of reform in the late Middle Ages that could have been generalized to the whole Catholic Church. And guess what he was against? Subsidy and usury. I don't know why it always happens this way, but it seems to me whenever you reach the end times, when it's total decadence, there are two things that get promoted: sodomy and usury.
Right, and you said that it was Max Weber's thesis as to what brought about the Protestantism or something. You said it was the corruption that was going on, that they wouldn't listen to Savonarola.
Well, basically, Savonarola came up with a program of reform. The people repented, they burned, they had the bonfires of the vanities, and people would throw their trinkets and whatever, dice, whatever it is, threw it on the fire and burned them all. There was moral reform, and basically the sodomites and the usurers collaborated to overthrow him, and the Pope went along with it, much to Pope Alexander VI, because Savonarola was calling for the King of France to depose the Pope and have a count, and the Pope didn't like that, and so he collaborated, and what they did is they lost their ability to reform, because the next time it came around, it was Luther.
But they had a chance.
That was 20 years later. Yeah, it was 20 years later, and it was Luther's time. And Luther broke the unity of Christendom, and by doing that, he destroyed the police power that the church had, and there were enclaves of usury that got established, enclaves of capitalism, namely England and Holland. And from this tumor grew and grew until it finally took over the entire world.
Right, and then America is a result of just pure Protestantism and a strong anti-Catholic.
In this sense. And so it's no coincidence that capitalism is state-sponsored usury, and that's the heart of the American system, basically. And that's what we're trying to impose on the rest of the world. So sodomy to soften you up, and then IMF loans to enslave the entire country to unrepayable debt. Happens over and over and over again. That's the crisis in Europe right now.
Don't you think, I see it in my own family, I see it if you read Genesis 19, Abraham is going down, God is going down in the Trinity to judge Sodom and Gomorrah, and he says, I got to tell Abraham what I'm about to do. And then he says, I've chosen Abraham because I know that he will command his children and make his family and house obey him. Well, God is saying this in light of the Sodomites, the fathers were weak. And when you grow up with a weak father, you don't have a father to identify with. The mother spoils you because
it's a breeding ground for homosexuality.
Well, that's what this country
Everybody knows that. Sigmund Freud knew that. Even Sigmund Freud knew that. It was the explanation for the genesis of homosexuality.
Right, and Gregory.
And it's the only one that makes any sense.
And Gregory Singer, who is one of the few, he was kind of a brilliant Presbyterian theologian, historian. He says, he's the one that boldly says the American Revolution was not justified whatsoever. He said they had to first dethrone God before they were the king, and that ultimately wiped out the father in the home. So the American Revolution was a direct attack, not only on God and the king, but on the father in the home. And all of a sudden, the women started gaining over the men. Until now, most women run most American homes, and most
that's why the elites, the members of the secret societies like Skull and Bones that run the country, that's why they promote feminism. Feminism weakens ethnic groups. That's why the first thing that Paul Wolfowitz did after the conquest of Iraq was to go over there and throw money around to create groups of feminists, because he knew feminism was for conquered peoples, to keep them conquered. Did it.
Right, and these are code words for something deeper. In my mind, the deeper issue is an historical Adam and Eve. That Adam, like Paul said, Adam was created first. Paul refers to Adam and Eve like historical. The woman is to be silent in the church. Why? Because she was created second. Adam is the head. I mean, that theme is always there. And once you remove those concepts, and we don't even have the Abraham-Sarah. Americans have nothing to go with. They just think marriage is a partnership and that's it. There's no archetypes, there's nothing.
Well, if homosexuals can get married, the term has no meaning.
Right.
It's the complete defeat.
And the theologians have done nothing to stop this. They've laid no barriers to this. There's no Adam and Eve. There's nothing there. They have nothing to protect us. Where I think the Muslims, to those things, they actually have something that can protect, even though it's under attack. But they have.
That's the question, though. The question is whether you have this kind of rigorous social order, whether it can withstand this corrosive influence.
This intellectual assault.
Yeah, that's the question. And that's why, in many ways, I'm hoping that my trips over there will help contribute to a successful resolution of this by saying, look, the birth control pills are important than where the hijab goes on your head. You know, the majority of the Iranian people right now are in childbearing years. This problem could be solved tomorrow. It's pure problem of consciousness, you know, and it has to means you have to have an accurate understanding of human sexuality, and that's precisely the crisis.
But part of it is that these people, the Iranians, my sister had her PhD there in Tucson, and I went down there for it, and there's all kinds of Muslims getting a PhD from Oman, from Jordan, from Palestine. And there's only one Muslim that was holding his ground. His PhD, his thesis on the existence of God, and that. But they're getting the training, the mindset from our institutions, and then they're going home. Their intellectual frame put into them by us to some degree, but because I only noticed that they're all yielding, and the only one that was holding his ground, and he couldn't stand them for playing hypocrites, he called them. Our educational system is worldwide.
It's not unlike Protestantism in the 19th century. How do you hold the line? Well, there was a group that didn't hold the line. The mainstreamers, the mainline churches didn't hold the line. They just went along with every single agenda, social engineers. And then there was a break-off group that was a kind of fundamentalist who just adhered to sola scriptura in a way that was that marginalized them. There's got to be some golden mean here. And I'm saying the church is the only institution that's in a position to do something along those lines.
Right. I mean, they have the magisterium. They go all the way back.
They have faith and reason.
But for some reason, they're completely ineffective in America. For some reason.
Well, the reason is Americanism. Villain was the anti-communist crusade that basically scared all Catholics into saying we have to support America because America is the only thing between us and communists taking over the world. Well, we're still talking that way, and there's no communism. Now it's Vladimir. He's not a communist. Okay? Russia is a Christian country. We're not. They are. But they're still trying to resurrect this fear, this Russophobia, because they have finally put a halt to the expansion of the American. That's what's driving this thing.
So they received you pretty well there in Iran.
Better than I deserved.
But do you have any?
They're just the nicest people in the world. Into Fazaa. As I said, I was in Shiraz, and then we drove about 100 miles further into the desert. And southeast, we're close to the hottest place on the face of the earth. And we pull in, it's nighttime, so it's a little bit cooler. I look up, and there's a billboard, and there's a familiar face on the billboard. It's me, my face on the billboard. They advertised my talk throughout the entire, and as a result, I had 500 people in my talk. 500 intensely, 500 intense Iranians who were really interested in drag-out discussion, no holds barred. You know, so I gave my talk about libido dominandi. I said birth control is the issue that's facing this country. I said to the ladies, throw away your birth control pills. And then we had a discussion that lasted almost 2 hours.
Right, I said a Q&A. Now, the lament at Notre Dame has always been you just can't get into an intellectual discussion. There's just people interested. Now, that is, I mean, Americans generally are...
These people, not only, they waited an hour. I was an hour late because of the drive through the desert. So they waited patiently for over an hour for me to speak. And I walked in, I'm just, all these people, they all came to see me. It's incredible.
I know.
So anyway, but these are people, these are intelligent people. As I said, the Magi were the first non-Hebraic people to work Logos, and they were Iranians. They were called them Persians at that time, but they were Iranians. And there's this connection between Iran and the Logos that perdures to this day.
Right, you were saying that basically they didn't fully swallow the Islamic faith.
An imposition on them. And I think that, so there's Iranian Islam is different. It's called the Shia, as opposed to the Sunni branch of, and they're in a civil war right now. There's no question. A war. That's what Iraq is about. The Sunni are fighting the Shia.
So it's still the same thing. There's still the Sunni are trying to impose the traditional Muslim, and the Shia are saying, hold it here.
Under the Baghdad, Islam became a religion in which you felt that if you tried to say God was reasonable, you were impugning his power. And so it became a religion of pure will. God could will whatever he wanted, and he had no logos to him whatsoever. Well, that's not a good... It was basically an instrumentalization of religion for political ends. It became the vehicle of Arab nationalism. Iranians are not Arabs.
Right, so it scares everybody away. So you have a father in the home that believes completely arbitrary. Right?
Tyrant. God is a tyrant.
Whereas Abraham,
pure will.
Whereas Abraham,
will.
The Christian father, following Abraham, he's still strong and he still leads, but he's still right. So the wife can still reason with him.
Yeah, but let me put it this way: there are 500 passionate people there, and there's me. And what prevented them from taking me hostage or stringing me up? It was logos. It was reason. Because come together to talk things over in a rational fashion. And they're a deeply civilized people. Their civilization is 2,500 years old. Ours is a tenth of that. As George Bernard Shaw said, America is a country that barbarism to decadence without finding civilization in between. That was not the case with Iran. They've had an ancient culture, an ancient cultivation of logos, and I experienced it firsthand. You know?
Do you think they understand it better than Americans do?
Absolutely, because they had me speak. Oh. And I understand America better than Americans. They got the cutting-edge, state-of-the-art interpretation of America. That's why they're smart. I mean, that's smart people.
So I think we only have 2 minutes. When are you going to finish your book?
It's finished.
Okay.
The book, or the capitalism book, will be out in September. Barren metal. History of capitalism as the conflict between labor and usury.
But barren metal is the title?
Title, yeah. It comes from Shakespeare, from The Merchant of Venice.
Okay, where you have Shylock and...
Yeah, Shylock, that whole story. It's not a new story.
Okay.
So
how many pages?
1,400.
1,400. So, and your Spirit of the Revolutionary Jew was...
That was only 1,200.
1,200.
This is the sequel to the Jewish Revolutionary Spirit.
Okay.
It's the other side of the coin. The Revolution, the User, how they collaborated. The two books come together to explain that.
Okay. So, I would try to. I would track it. You can look up Mike on what culture.
Culturewars.com.
Okay.
Books available there. Any book that I've mentioned is available there.
Okay. So, I pray that you would take this and go with it and you'll find and seek after wisdom and understanding, and it's found in Jesus Christ. So till next week, God bless.
Considered a safe house. If a young woman herself with an opportunity to escape, where would you encourage those young women to go?
That's a great question. I guess I would say that both of those sound like great options if you know where they are. Fortunately, what I have read about is that sometimes someone will run away and they'll just be returned back. You know, they'll find a policeman, you know, and this is especially, I've read about this in, for example, the Middle East. Return the woman back to her family or
well,
whoever.
ladies, you know, time flies. Time has flown. And this time we're going to have to end the program. And thank you for being our guest. I hope to have you back again. This is George Lane. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy our program, write to me. 245 Division, Mishawaka. Thanks for watching.